Imagine trying to put out a fire in a massive, sprawling forest, but the fire isn't just burning the trees overhead. It is burning deep underground, travelling through the root system, popping up miles away when you least expect it.
That is probably the most accurate way to describe the security crisis in Nigeria over the last 2 decades. You are looking at the economic powerhouse of Africa, a vibrant, diverse nation, but one that has been locked in a really brutal struggle against extremism.
And it is a struggle that often gets painted in broad, simplistic strokes by the outside world. You hear about it on the news, and it is framed almost entirely as a religious war. Radicalized Muslim groups on one side, Christian communities on the other, and a whole lot of tragedy in between. Whew. But the reality on the ground is infinitely more complex. And today, we are going to unpack something that doesn't get nearly enough spotlight. What exactly is the United States doing about it? Is it just sending weapons and drones? Or is there a deeper strategy at play?
It is a fascinating question, because the U.S. involvement in Nigeria is a masterclass in the limits and the necessities of foreign intervention. When people think of counterterrorism, they immediately picture special forces, airstrikes, and military raids. And yes, hard power is absolutely a piece of the puzzle, but you cannot bomb an ideology. You cannot shoot a grievance.
Exactly. If you just cut the top off a weed, it grows back thicker. You have to pull the root. So let us start with the hard power first, just to set the baseline, and then dig into those roots. How is the US actually assisting the Nigerian military in a kinetic sense?
The most visible symbol of that partnership recently has been the A-29 Super Tucano aircraft. The U.S. sold these light attack planes to Nigeria specifically to help them target insurgent strongholds, particularly Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa, up in the northern and central regions. But it is not just handing over the keys to some fighter jets. The U.S. military has been heavily involved in intelligence sharing, providing satellite imagery, and training Nigerian forces on how to conduct operations that minimize civilian casualties.
Which is incredibly crucial, because if the military goes into a village and accidentally harms the very civilians they are trying to protect, they are just doing the terrorists' recruitment work for them.
Spot on. Collateral damage is the lifeblood of extremist propaganda. The extremists will immediately point to that and say, "Look, the state doesn't care about you. We are your only protectors." The US knows this, which is why a massive chunk of their military training focuses on human rights compliance and civil-military relations.
But let's pivot, because this is where the story gets really interesting. The user of a weapon is only as effective as the society standing behind them. You mentioned earlier that this conflict is often framed as Muslims against Christians. Groups like Boko Haram have notoriously targeted churches, kidnapped Christian schoolgirls, and tried to ignite a full-blown sectarian war. How does a foreign government like the US step into a deeply intimate religious and cultural divide without making things worse?
It is a geopolitical tightrope. If the US comes in too heavy-handed, it validates the extremist narrative of Western, Christian imperialism, trying to subjugate the local Muslim population. So, the US has to lead from behind. They do this primarily through soft power, heavily utilizing agencies like USAID and the State Department.
So, what does that look like on a Tuesday in rural Nigeria? Are we talking about building schools or something more nuanced?
Both, actually. But the most impactful work is the interfaith dialogue initiatives. The U.S. funds local NGOs and community groups that literally bring imams and Christian pastors into the exact same room.
I love that, just putting the community pillars face to face.
Right. Because in many of these fractured regions, segregation is driven by fear. When the U.S. sponsors these peacebuilding workshops, they are creating a safe space for religious leaders to sit down, break bread, and realize they actually share the exact same enemy.
Poverty and radicalization.
Precisely. The extremist groups want to destroy the very fabric of the community. When a pastor and an imam stand shoulder to shoulder in a village square and jointly condemn violence, it completely short-circuits the terrorists' narrative. The U.S. provides the funding, the logistical support, and the conflict resolution frameworks, but it is the local Nigerian leaders who are the actual face of the peace process.
That makes a lot of sense. It is empowering the immune system of the society rather than just giving it external medicine. And we have to acknowledge a painful nuance here. While the narrative often highlights the horrific attacks on Christians, which are very real and devastating, the vast majority of the victims of groups like Boko Haram are actually other Muslims.
That is a critical point that often gets lost in Western media. Boko Haram operates on a radical, exclusionary ideology. If you are a Muslim who believes in secular education, or if you simply disagree with their brutal tactics, you are branded an apostate. You are a target. By understanding this, U.S. policy has shifted from just a binary view of protecting one group to a holistic view of protecting community resilience.
It is like trying to build a firebreak. You aren't just protecting the oak trees, you are trying to save the entire forest. So, beyond getting religious leaders to talk, what is the US doing about the economic despair? Because you and I both know that an empty stomach is the loudest voice in the room. If a young man has no job, no prospects, and an extremist group offers him a rifle, a sense of belonging, and a monthly stipend, that is a terrifyingly easy sell.
It is the ultimate vulnerability, and this is where USAID does the heavy lifting. The U.S. has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into agricultural development, vocational training, and basic education in northern Nigeria. They are trying to create an alternative economy. For instance, the U.S. supports programs that teach modern farming techniques to communities that are suffering from the effects of climate change.
Wait, climate change? How does that tie into religious terrorism?
It is the hidden multiplier. In the middle belt of Nigeria, you have historically had nomadic herders, who are predominantly Muslim, and settled farmers, who are predominantly Christian. For centuries, they had a symbiotic relationship. The cows would eat the leftover crop stalks and fertilize the land. But as the Sahara Desert expands southward due to climate change, water and arable land are disappearing.
So the herders are pushed further south into the farmers' lands.
Exactly. Now they are competing for survival. What starts as a fight over a watering hole quickly gets hijacked by political and religious extremists who weaponize the conflict. They tell the herders, the Christians are trying to starve you. They tell the farmers, the Muslims are trying to conquer your land.
That is chilling. A purely ecological and economic crisis gets dressed up in religious clothing.
And that is why U.S. intervention is so multifaceted. By funding water management projects, introducing drought-resistant crops, and setting up early warning systems for community conflicts, the U.S. is literally de-escalating religious violence by solving an agricultural problem. It is brilliant, really. You fight terrorism with irrigation just as much as you do with aviation.
That is a profound way to look at it. It really forces us to ask a philosophical question about the nature of peace. Can peace actually be engineered from the outside, or does it always have to be born from within? The US can provide the tools, the funding, and the training, but at the end of the day, it is the Nigerian people who have to choose to bridge that divide.
And they are choosing it every single day, often at great personal risk. There are stories of Muslim communities forming human shields around churches during Sunday services to protect their Christian neighbors, and Christians doing the same for mosques during Friday prayers. The U.S. strategy, at its absolute best, doesn't try to save Nigeria. It tries to amplify the voices of Nigerians who are already saving themselves.
But it is not a perfect system, right? There have to be blind spots in the American approach.
Absolutely. The biggest critique is consistency and alignment. Sometimes, the U.S. security assistance moves much faster than the humanitarian aid. You end up with a heavily militarized response in a region that desperately needs schools and hospitals. Furthermore, corruption within local power structures can siphon off aid or misuse military equipment. The U.S. has to constantly audit and recalibrate its partnerships, which causes friction.
It is a delicate dance. You have to respect national sovereignty while demanding accountability for human rights and the proper use of funds.
And let us not forget the psychological toll on the ground. Decades of violence leave deep generational trauma. You can rebuild a bombed-out market, but how do you rebuild trust between neighbors who have been told for 10 years that they are sworn enemies?
That is the invisible infrastructure of a society: trust. And maybe that is the most important thing the US programs are trying to rebuild. Not just roads or military capacity, but the social contract itself.
If Nigeria succeeds in stabilizing its northern and central regions, it won't just be a victory for them, it will be a blueprint for the rest of the world. Nigeria is projected to be one of the most populous countries on Earth by the end of this century. The stakes could not be higher. If extremism takes root there permanently, it destabilizes the entire continent. But if they can forge a lasting, pluralistic peace, it proves that coexistence can survive even the most vicious attempts to destroy it.
It is a powerful reminder that security isn't just the absence of violence, it is the presence of opportunity, of understanding, and of shared humanity. The work the US is doing there, balancing the hard power of security with the soft power of economic and spiritual healing, is a massive undertaking. It is imperfect, it is ongoing, but it is absolutely vital.
It truly is. The roots of extremism are deep, but the desire for a peaceful, prosperous life is a universal human trait. Nurturing that desire is the only permanent cure.
A perfect thought to end on. We have covered a lot of ground today, from the skies over the savannas to the quiet conversations in village squares. It leaves you wondering, when we look at conflicts around the globe, are we focusing too much on the fire and not enough on the soil that feeds it? Something to think about until next time.